here to the State Department. He is here on a very important visit, having already met many high officials in the White House and at the Pentagon and elsewhere in our government.
Goodness gracious. Wow, that's something there. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, guys. Thank you very much. This is beautiful. This way, sir. Thank you.
They are so powerful, they have a country named after them. They are the Saud family of Saudi Arabia.
I'm a Saudi, you're a Saudi, he's or she is a Saudi means you belong to that family.
Saudi Arabia is a dictatorship managed by a democracy. We're really talking about a core group of maybe 15 to 30 princes that are really controlling the final decision on everything.
A kingdom the size of Western Europe, with a quarter of the world's known oil deposits, riches that could tip the balance of global history. But with an increasingly radical populace and a resource that won't last forever, is the sun setting on the House of Saud.
It's a remarkable family in that it's held on to a fairly fragile country.
They all know their survival depends upon staying together and staying in power.
And each day brings further evidence that the ways we use energy strengthen our adversaries and threaten our planet.
Western leaders point to Middle Eastern oil as one of the most pressing problems facing their countries. And to many, one nation is synonymous with foreign oil: Saudi Arabia. It was called the day the West woke up. The fact that 15 of the 19 terrorists on September 11, 2001 were Saudi nationals surprised some. Saudi Arabia has been a close ally of both Europe and the United States, but this seemingly worldly group of princes and kings has had a long-lasting alliance with a branch of Islam that has little fondness for the West.
Saudi royal family funded the extremists for years. I mean, we're talking about going back to the 30s, back to independence.
So these people really control the media today. And therefore, they control the schools, and they have great access to propagating their ideas.
Some Saudis enjoy the trappings of immeasurable wealth and privilege, the majority of the population struggles with daily oppression. And while ignoring issues in their homeland, Arab oil magnates remain committed to exporting regime change to neighbouring countries. In the region is RT's Oksana Boyka.
The Corniche embankment in Beirut is famed for its refreshing breeze and its breezy ways. It's a place where headscarves and miniskirts don't come into conflict, even when donned all at once. With a reputation as the most liberal Arab society, Lebanon is oddly becoming a refuge for the citizens of the region's most restricted country. Thousands of Saudis come to Beirut every month in what some call a freedom vacation.
I was born in KSA. I suffered a lot there because it's too limited. I have to cover my face, my eyes, my whole body. What? I'm a human being over here. Please look at me.
It is here where many Saudi women get a chance to walk the streets all by themselves, and Saudi men can indulge themselves in gambling in Beirut's many casinos, something that would be absolutely off limits at home.
Saudi Arabia is the most conservative country in the world, where women are still banned from driving and need the permission from their male guardian, be it a father, a husband or a son, to simply get a job. The royal family that's been keeping these rules in place insists they are part of Saudi heritage and therefore should be respected. But while prescribing this restrictive lifestyle for its citizens, some members of Saudi elite don't seem to think these rules apply to themselves.
When it comes to cutting loose abroad, some of the Saudi establishment don't exactly present a picture of religious piety. Saudi princes have been seen raining hundreds of thousands of dollars on women in nightclubs, ready cash by their sides. The excesses of the select few and restrictions for everybody else has not gone unnoticed, fueling public discontent that over the past year has been repeatedly met with live rounds. 4 protesters have been killed in Riyadh this year alone, with up to 50 arrested. In March, the country's religious council issued a fatwa that equated demonstrations to a sin, punishable by death.
Once you have a demonstration in Saudi Arabia, typically that demonstration would be repressed harshly. And we have heard and seen many reports by independent reporters and human rights organizations verifying this fact. Demonstrations in Saudi Arabia are simply illegal.
Yet, despite harsh treatment of its own protesters, Saudi Arabia has been very supportive of revolt elsewhere. Riyadh was among the first to push for international intervention in Libya, while in Syria it's believed to be the main financier of the rebels.
When things did not move as expected, mainly because of the Russian and Chinese vetoes at the UN, I think they decided to play a major role, and by announcing even publicly that they're planning to arm the rebels in Syria.
For all its rough tactics at home and abroad, KSA is never scolded by the USA. Riyadh and Washington are currently negotiating a $60 billion sale of advanced American weapons, brothers in arms. Conveniently, they're still not each other's keepers. Oksana Boyko, RT, Beirut, Lebanon.
Dozens of women staged the biggest demonstration of its kind today on the streets of Saudi Arabia, claiming a basic right in the rest of the world, the right to drive a car. Holly Williams has more.
In one of the most conservative nations in the world, this is an act of defiance. Today, dozens of Saudi Arabian women posted online videos of themselves behind the wheel, rebelling against an unwritten rule. There's no law against them driving, but Saudi authorities have warned they'll arrest any woman they catch and use force if necessary. Manal al-Sharif was arrested by Saudi Arabia's religious police for driving in 2011.
It's a symbol of defiance.
She told us she also lost her job as a result and has received abuse and threats.
You always have to be prepared when you speak up against the odds or the status quo to pay a price. Profanity, lies, rumors, you could lose your job, you could lose everything.
Saudi Arabia is heavily segregated and women have few legal rights. They're not allowed to work or travel overseas without the permission of a male relative. Though some Saudis want their society to modernize, many powerful Islamic clerics are against it. One of them recently appeared on TV and claimed that driving would harm women's ovaries.
The gathering was small, its impact potentially huge. Here, long-simmering anger shatters longer-standing cultural taboos. In the ultra-conservative heartland of Saudi Arabia, where women are struggling to gain their own rights, these mothers, daughters, sisters, and wives ventured out, many with their children, demanding the rights they say their loved ones have been denied. Demonstrating in the town of Buraida, calling for the release of relatives they say have been jailed for years without access to lawyers, never having been tried. In a country where protests are prohibited, it didn't take long for the police to show up. This amateur video posted on YouTube appears to show security forces encircling the women. According to Amnesty International, 18 women and 10 children were arrested. Residents were quick to plead for their release. In this video, a woman cries as she secretly films riot police outside the jail where some of the women were reportedly taken. Disbelief heard in the voice of a man asking why women and children would have been detained. Outrage grew quickly, leading to even more demonstrations. Here, Buraida again. Not just a march, a declaration, chanting they do not fear the country's interior minister, demanding he release the women, announcing their arrest a red line that should never have been crossed. Activists say small protests spread to other cities. In Riyadh, the country's capital, they called for the release of the women and children. In Mecca, the kingdom's religious capital, they called for the release of political prisoners. Activists say many are held in connection with the country's counter-terrorism efforts, those charges disputed by their relatives. The protests, an extraordinary development in an absolute monarchy intolerant of dissent.
Now, in recent weeks, Saudi Arabia has launched an offensive against anti-regime activists, arresting many and sentencing some to years in jail. The total number of political prisoners has now surpassed 40,000, according to some reports. The crackdown has even forced a member of the ruling family to defect. RT Arabic spoke exclusively to Saudi Prince Khaled bin Farhan Al Saud, who accuses the monarchy of corruption and silencing all voices of dissent.
The government is obviously scared of the Arab revolutions, and they've responded as they usually do, by resorting to oppression, violence, arbitrary law, and arrest. The easiest thing they can do is deprive you of your salary or fire you altogether. The ruling regime is not guided by justice, and this is especially true of the Ministry of Interior. There is no independent judiciary, as both police and the prosecutor's office are accountable to the Interior Ministry. The ministry's officials investigate crimes, they call them crimes, related to freedom of speech. So they fabricate evidence, don't allow people to have attorneys. Things like that happen all over the place. They even put people under arrest for an indefinite amount of time. Even if a court rules to release such a criminal, the Ministry of Interior keeps him in prison, even though there is a court order to release him. There have even been killings. And as for the external opposition, Saudi intelligence forces find these people abroad. There is no safety inside or outside the country.
Could you describe these people who oppose the royal family, and what are their goals?
Opposition used to demand wider people's representation in governing bodies, more rights and freedoms. But the authorities reacted with violence and persecution instead of a dialogue. Now the opposition wants this regime gone.
We both know that despite numerous human rights violations in Saudi Arabia, your country seldom faces criticism from the West, and from the United States in particular. When senior US officials meet with their Saudi counterparts, do you think they convey any critical comments from Washington vis-à-vis Riyadh?
The White House certainly does maintain a long-standing alliance with the leaders of Saudi Arabia, cemented by common interests in the Middle East. To that end, there are classified contacts between Riyadh and the U.S. administration. In recent time, they have been employed to step up the government-administered reforms. But those reforms are not driven by the elite's desire to empower the people of the kingdom. Instead, they are merely urged by reforms that the regime might fall unless it reforms itself. Oppression is widespread in Saudi Arabia. There is no free speech, no freedom of expression. Corruption is rampant in all areas. From low-level bureaucrats to high-ranking officials, every civil servant is very skillful in using bribes in their operations.
Well, the Saudi regime's crackdown remains largely ignored by the international community, leaving it free to advise other regional powers on how to move towards democracy. RT's Lindsay France takes a look at the country's own dire record of dealing with its internal democrats.
As Saudi Arabia violently squashes the voice of any opposition, we see it sitting front and center in discussions of the democratic transition of power within other countries, such as Syria. On the one hand, it reportedly ships arms to the opposition in Syria. On the other hand, peaceful opposition in Saudi Arabia is answered with prison sentences, torture, even death for people who voiced their own opinion. In fact, in October 2012, Amnesty International called on the Saudi authorities to stop using excessive force against pro-democracy protesters. Here are just a few examples from this year alone. On June 17th, Miklif al-Shamari was convicted of sowing discord and other offenses through writings and exposure of human rights abuses. He got 5 years in prison. June 24th, 7 men were convicted of inciting protests, illegal gatherings, and breaking allegiance with the king, mostly by joining Facebook pages and posting messages. They each got between 5 and 10 years in prison. Then we've got, on the same day, website editor Raif Badawi, convicted of insulting Islam and authorities through his website and during television interviews. He was sentenced to 7 years in prison and 600 lashes. In these conditions, anyone with something substantial to say about the government, society, or religion wouldn't be blamed for keeping a low profile. And this is where the man being called the Saudi Assange comes in. No one knows who he is, what he looks like, or where he lives. His prolific tweets denouncing the ruling family as corrupt and enriching themselves from government coffers have earned him over 1 million followers. He is known only as Mujtahid. I spoke with him over Google Chat to find out why he stays in hiding, because it's not for safety. I asked him why he remains anonymous. He said, ironically, anonymity boosts his credibility and encourages people to follow him and talk about his stories without worrying. I asked if this meant that people could pay less attention to his biography and more attention to his message. He pointed out the regime can destroy your credibility easily and deter people from dealing with you if your identity is public. While Mujtahid is forced underground, a new monarchy-backed religious diversity center has launched its own charm offensive in Vienna. According to its mission statement, it encourages dialogue among followers of different religions and cultures. King Abdullah has also announced a donation of $100 million to set up a United Nations Center for Fighting Terrorism. One of its 4 pillars is to prevent conditions conducive to the spread of terrorism and ensuring respect for human rights. So while the king's clerics preach a hardline form of Islam that often becomes a breeding ground for extremism, Saudi Arabia is assuming a moral high ground in advising other nations in transitional democracy.
The brutal executions by Islamic State have drawn comparisons to the increasingly regular beheadings carried out in Saudi Arabia. A top Saudi official hit back at international criticism, saying the country executes convicts on a legal basis, unlike Islamic State. However, both the terrorist group and the Gulf monarchy base their versions of justice on a hardline interpretation of Sharia law. Blasphemy, homosexual acts, treason and murder are punishable by death through beheading in Saudi Arabia and Islamic State. Under both regimes, convicted married adulterers can even be stoned to death. Stealing is also a serious crime in both cases and is punishable by the amputation of a hand. In fact, since the start of the year, more people have been publicly put to death in Saudi Arabia than actually under Islamic State. The Saudi record has been slammed by human rights watchdogs, though Western governments are turning a blind eye because of their alliance with Riyadh. Well, that's according to activist Danny Mackey.
This is not just a violation of human rights, it's a violation of pure humanity. So when Saudi Arabia compares this to a legitimate Islamic way of punishment, then they're no better than ISIS. In my opinion, Saudi Arabia has a sort of political consensus or a deal with the Western countries. They continue to commit human rights abuses, and in return, the West is silent on this for political credit, for continuation and excellent economic relations. Saudi Arabia, in terms of a human rights sense, is one of the worst states in the world, and the king being deceased and a new king coming into power, this won't change anything, as this is a problem within Saudi Arabia which is met with genuine silence by the West, and this makes the West complicit in these forms of violence perpetrated by Saudi Arabia.
The verdict, shocking. The sentence, even more so. A Saudi woman beheaded. Her crime? Practicing witchcraft and sorcery. According to Saudi Arabia's Ministry of Interior, Amina bint Abdul Halim Nasser was executed on Monday. London-based Saudi daily Al Hayat quotes a source in the country's religious police who said authorities searched Nasser's home, finding books on sorcery, a number of talismans, and glass bottles filled with liquids commonly used for the purposes of magic. The source added Nasser was selling spells and bottles of the liquid potions for about $400. CNN could not reach Saudi Arabia's religious police or Ministry of Justice for comment. Amnesty International issued a statement calling the execution deeply shocking, saying it highlights the urgent need for a halt in executions in Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, an absolute monarchy, practices a puritanical version of Islam. In the deeply conservative kingdom, sorcery, witchcraft, and blasphemy are all offenses that can be punishable by death. And this is not the first sorcery case in Saudi Arabia to draw the anger of rights groups. In 2008, Lebanese TV host Ali Hussein Sabat was arrested on charges of sorcery while in Saudi Arabia on a religious pilgrimage. In 2009, he was found guilty and sentenced to death. While Sabat has not been executed, he remains in prison. Saudi Arabia's judicial system also made headlines this month for the sentence imposed on Australian national Mansour Al-Marib. He was convicted of blasphemy while performing the Hajj and sentenced to 500 lashes and a year in prison. The Australian government is pleading Al-Marib's case. In its statement, Saudi Arabia's Interior Ministry said Nasser had been investigated before her arrest and that she was, quote, convicted of what she was accused of based on the law. Mohammed Jamjoom, CNN, Abu Dhabi.
واضح؟ دقيقة مرة واضح والله
Authorities in Saudi Arabia have executed 5 Yemeni men in punishment for murder and robbery and hung their bodies from a crane in full public view as further punishment. The 5 men were executed in the southwestern town of Jizan and have been identified as Khalid Adel and Qasim Sarah, Saif Ali Al-Sahari and Khalid Shoei Al-Sahari.
يا ولد يا ولد اسكت يا ولد اشهد ان لا اله تعليق ما يدخل
لا إله إلا الله
اسمع واسمع